my name is Dirk Lemmermann, and I've been working with Java since 1996, so almost the entire time, almost the entire 30 years, only shy 1 year. But I did see a little Java demo like in 1995, a little animated wave in a browser window, and I thought that was absolutely fascinating that you can add an app to a web page, which was supposed to be only a little document, right? And I still strongly believe that web pages should only be documents and not applications. I'm a big fan of desktop applications, and honestly, I always consider the whole web UI development like one accident following the next. And that's why we keep seeing frameworks of the week or frameworks of the month. And I really like to do UI development, but I hate the idea that I constantly have to relearn a new technology. I'm open to learning, but please, not every month. And that's why I like desktop development so much. I did a lot of UI development with Swing, and now I'm doing a lot of development with JavaFX. And because I'm using these technologies, I've been able to reuse my knowledge and my skills for decades and become really, really good at these technologies and become an expert in these technologies. And that's what I like about desktop development.
You've been in Java from the early start, which is really great. So you have gone through this whole evolution. And then how did you discover JavaFX?
Well, I always heard about JavaFX as the successor of Swing, but I also heard all these bad news in the beginning, like version 1 and 2. The script-based version, people didn't like very much. It was slow, it was sluggish, it was buggy. So I never had any intentions to switch to JavaFX. But then version 8 came out, which looked much better and gave you a proper Java API for coding in JavaFX. And I had this one customer who used one of my products, a Swing-based Gantt charting framework called FlexGantt. And that customer wanted to switch and move to JavaFX. So they asked me if I could do a port of FlexGantt to JavaFX. And I was still not very motivated, but at that time I had a really, really boring job. And I thought, well, anything is better than continue to working on that job, right? So I said, okay, let me give this a try. And that was just at the right time because of the JavaFX 8 version. And I really fell in love with the API. I loved how you could now listen to properties, create these bindings between the UI elements and the model data. And I was just amazed how cool this technology was. I really fell in love with it. And then I implemented FlexGanttFX. And that was quite a success too. So I was able to license it to a couple of big companies. For example, Emirates Airlines is using this in their day-to-day operations. And it was just a very pleasant experience to work with JavaFX.
You have some very nice background, by the way.
Yeah, so these are still some leftovers from a JavaFX specific conference that I organized that took place in Zurich a couple of years ago. We had an on-site conference for 2 years in a row, and then we had COVID, and then we had 2 more online versions of it. Every crisis is also an opportunity. The online version showed us like how much easier it is to reach people. So on site, we had 50, 60 attendees back then, and online we had 250, 300 attendees. So a much bigger reach. And I was supported by the guys from Karakun, a software company in Basel. And we ended up with a really nice professional production and also videos that you can still find online on YouTube. I did notice that very often a lot of people didn't know much about JavaFX and they thought nobody's using it. And the problem is you use it for desktop applications. You use it most of the time. Companies use it for in-house solutions. So they are hidden behind corporate walls. They are not as exposed as web applications, obviously. And you also didn't, at least back then, in the beginning, you didn't use it for mobile apps. Nowadays, you can use it for mobile too. But back then, desktop only and only behind corporate walls. So people didn't know about it. And I decided that this needs to change. And I created this real-world applications presentation that I showed at Java 1 conferences several times and also at conferences in Germany. And I collected a lot of apps that either I worked on directly myself or people used my libraries, and that's why I knew about this, or simply these other people, they knew that I'm presenting this stuff, so they made contributions to the presentation. So this is the presentation, and as you can see, it is very big. It has 210 slides. So I ended up with a lot of apps in various domains. So there are JavaFX applications for sports coaching, for managing vessels at a port, at a seaport, for medical research, aviation, all kinds of things. Okay, and some of these projects that I worked on, for example, this one from a company called Sideline Sports. They had this app called Presentation Builder. They developed this software for coaches. They would record their teams at practice or at matches, and then they would create a presentation, a short presentation that they could show to their players to analyze the game. Like, what did they do well and what didn't they do well? If you work with JavaFX, you can create really, really attractive UIs, and that helps you even when you need to create marketing material. So in this case, they have this nice video and they cut in like the screens of the application.
So this is actually a combination of a video editor that you can add some markings on the video?
Yes. So you have this timeline at the bottom, like in a regular video editor. And in the upper right, you have this list of clips. And you can drag the clips into the timeline and then create transitions and add overlays and annotations to the video material. So they can draw arrows and things like that. Something else I worked on was this software for architects. Okay. And like I said, I created this Gantt charting framework. They licensed this Gantt charting framework, and then we built this application around the framework. So in this window, for example, you see a split screen with 3 different Gantt chart instances. Focusing on different things, like the top one on the various tasks that need to be executed during the building of a house. Then in the middle, you see the resource allocation, like the different teams and people, how well they are allocated. And then at the bottom, that looks like a regular chart, but that's also a Gantt chart. They use this also FlexGantt to display the costs for the project at various stages. So there was another one. This was also a very nice project for the European Broadcasting Union, where they use a JavaFX desktop application to schedule transmissions from one place to another. So if there's like a sports event, they have like a team there recording the event. They have their special trucks. They feed the signal into a dish to the satellite and to another dish, and then they feed the signal into a fiber network. All of these resources, they need to be scheduled. They need to be available at the time of the transmission, and they use this software for that, where once again, they use FlexGanttFX to display which resource is used when, how much.
This FlexGantt is an open source project, or is it a license model? Because I know you have different libraries.
Yeah, so I have all kinds of libraries. Almost all of them are open source except for FlexGanttFX. Because it's a very big framework, it is very complex, and usually you cannot just give it to other companies and they use it by themselves. You need to hold their hands quite a bit and you have to consult them. So there's usually a lot of work involved too to get them up and running, because it's not a trivial component like a list view or a table view. It is very complex. It allows the user to edit the data in the Gantt chart, move things around, drag and drop, and they need to plug in their business logic into the visualization and then interact and implement the interaction between the visualization and the business logic. And it is complex.
It's actually a package. You get the library, but you also get the support to implement it in the right way.
Yes. So with every license comes support, and I can tell that people need the support. Okay, it's not easy, and not everybody is like a skilled UI developer. Many companies, they say, guys, we need this front end. Can you please hook this up? And these guys, they worked on back end the whole life, and all of a sudden their manager comes and says, please hook up this super complex Gantt charting framework to our UI. Okay, and then developers are overwhelmed and they need somebody like me to consult.
But that's when you have these very complicated UIs. But isn't it great that thanks to all these free libraries and just JavaFX being available for free, you can create as a Java developer, if you only have done backend development, you can indeed create a very nice UI
Yes,
using basic components or a styling library which is available for free.
I think there are lots of high quality components already built into the core JavaFX framework, but with any UI framework, it can never be complete because our dear designer colleagues, they always come up with some nice new visualization how they want to display data, and then you have to either implement this yourself or you do a nice internet research. And in most cases, you find somebody has already done this.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally, I would suggest to look at ControlsFX, which has been around for some time. And I've also been a committer to the ControlsFX project for many years. But then I decided that I wanted to move a little bit faster than this project. And I started my own project called GemsFX. And that's where I put all the fancy custom controls that are not part of JavaFX. I put them into the GemsFX project. So there you can find things like a multi-column list view that supports drag and drop, for example, or a nice notification framework that looks very much like the notifications that you see on Macs, with the toasts. I think they're called toasts nowadays. Sliding in from the upper right corner, and you can stack them and you can expand them. That is another control that you can find in GemsFX.
And this GemsFX library, all these new versions are regularly listed in the links of the week on JFX Central, which happens to be something you created. Why and how?
Like I told you, I really wanted to make sure that people are aware of JavaFX and that people do build a lot of applications. So I think the initial thought was I wanted to have a place where I could take my keynote presentation, the one that I was giving at conferences. I got a little bit bored of giving the same presentation over and over again. And also maintaining the slide list was complex, and the presentation got bigger and bigger. It's I think almost 2 gigabytes nowadays. I wanted a new place for that. I think that's what really triggered the initial idea behind JFX Central. I wanted a place where I could upload all these showcases. Can find a lot of them. So on each page there are 9. There are 6 pages. So it's 50 something presentations now that you can find here. And you can click on the presentation, you find out more detail, what exactly the application is doing, what it looks like. And if possible, we are also linking videos and information about the people who worked on this project. That was the initial idea, but then I thought, well, wouldn't it also be good if we could add all the libraries and the tools and all the various, basically the entire ecosystem behind JavaFX? Wouldn't it be good if we linked everything into JFX Central? And by the way, the very initial idea behind JFX Central was also to have this running as an iPad application, because not only did I want to show all these showcases, I also wanted to dig more into the support for mobile application development that the guys from Gluon are providing. I thought that would be nice, but then I realized that the reach for this application would be very limited if it only ran on iPad. And I noticed that there was this other company called JPro, or this tool called JPro, that would allow us to also put this application on the web. And now we have a desktop application and a web application of JFX Central. Right? So it's exactly the same application. Let's go to the home page here. This is the desktop application, and this is the web application version of it. Right? And it's exactly the same code base, except with a few if-then statements in the code base. Okay, but really only a handful of if-thens.
Yeah. Both based on JavaFX, of course.
Both are completely JavaFX based. Yeah. So what the guys are doing at JPro is they basically run the application on the server side, and they create something that is called the scene graph, and they serialize the scene graph and then use JavaScript and HTML, and I think even some SVG, not so sure about that. And they render the JavaFX application, the headless JavaFX application, they render it in the browser. So these are showcases. And by the way, that's another one, for example, that another project that I wrote called CoachFX, also from this one company called Sideline FX. And you can run the application right here on the website. This is all done in JavaFX. And this is a plugin for the video editing software that I've shown earlier. And you can create stills, freeze a frame, and then annotate it. For example, with a spotlight. So you can create a spotlight here, and then you can animate the spotlight. It comes in like this, right? Or you can add arrows like this, right? And you can see this is now running inside the browser. But my customers, they use this as a desktop application, all in JavaFX, no HTML or anything or JavaScript.
If you go back to the homepage of JFX Central, so you have there 2 links to the GitHub projects. So
yes.
Both the project itself, the code, and the data are shared there. Can you maybe show a bit of this?
The entire code base is available on GitHub. If you follow the JFX Central button here, you will get the code for the actual UI. If you want to study some of our patterns or how we did things, like you go to the app, you see something cool here, just go to our GitHub repository and see how we did that. Our application is not internationalized, which is actually a good thing, because if you see some string in here, some text, you can just perform a search on the GitHub repository and you find the place in the code where we create that UI element. If you want to contribute to JFX Central, for example, you have a really cool showcase application, then you need to go to the JFX Central data repository, which is another GitHub repository that only consists of the data. So, for example, you go to, unfortunately, it's not called Showcase, but here we call it Real World. A little inconsistency between our UI and our backend or data repository. So if you want to contribute a real world application or showcase application, you just add an entry, a directory in here. And if you look at the other entries, you will quickly figure out what it is that you need to provide, like a README, a couple of screenshots, an image that we can use for the banner. For example, if you go to showcases and we go to this application, you can see that we have a banner here at the top, and then we have a couple of screenshots here, and the text is the README. Okay. So that's how you add your application to our repository. But there's also one more place. There's at the end of this directory, you will find a JSON file called real world JSON. So you have to register your application in this JSON file, and then you're good to go. So it's not rocket science.
And we have to highlight that the repository with the code of the website is the only repository you have, because you built from it the same thing for the web, desktop, and mobile, correct?
And mobile. And that's a fascinating thing. So we use Gluon to deploy it to the iPhone. We currently do not have an Android version, but maybe Frank, you want to work on that, didn't you?
I did some attempts, but still working on it.
Some attempts, yeah. I didn't feel like fuzzing around with the Play Store by Google.
That's indeed
we will. Yeah, eventually we will get to that. So far, it's only running on iOS, and the version on iOS actually looks a little bit different than the desktop version. In the beginning, it did not, but then Apple refused to accept it because they said if it looks like a web application, it is a web application, and then you cannot deploy it to their devices. It should feel like a mobile application. So we redid some of the screens for the mobile application, and I think in the end the application really benefited from that. But the rest, everything behind these screens, is still exactly the same code base that we have for the desktop application.
That's one of those if-then statements you said you have in the code.
Yes.
If it's running on iOS, then show this UI. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So we are in the App Store now, and if I click on the download button, obviously you can find it under its name, JFX Central. It downloads it quickly. So let me open this, and the first time you open this, you get this nice welcome screen. and it tells you a little bit about JFX Central and what it is that you can find inside of it. And you can swipe through. This is the regular pagination control that you can find in JavaFX. Okay, so a couple of nice AI generated images, and then you press on start, and you get the same content that you can find on the website, but rendered differently so that it makes sense on a mobile device and that it is easy for you to select something. Okay, for example, now we are in the books section. Here we are in the cool JavaFX in action section. You can also find news, like the links of the week here. You can expand this tray. You can find various tools that are available for JavaFX, and so on, and so on.
This JFX Central is really nice. So that's an open source project. Everyone can contribute, can see how you created it. But you are one of those people who's working on an in-house business application that people normally don't see. But now we have the opportunity that you can show us.
Yeah, so I'm working for a company called Senapt. And by the way, Senapt is the main sponsor of all the work that went into JFX Central. Okay. I was not the only developer working on it. I also have a colleague who also works at Senapt, who actually lives in Japan, Lee, and he also worked on JFX Central. And all of our time and work was actually financed by Senapt. Now, Senapt is a company that's trying to implement something called energy as a service. Now, unfortunately, this does not mean that you can go to our website and then you get free electricity. But what it is that we do is that we provide a software for energy suppliers so that these are companies that actually provide electricity to your homes, and they use our software to manage their customers and create bills for their customers. But before they can do any of that, they also need to be able to create the various products, which are different tariffs, like for domestic customers or for commercial customers. We are doing this in the United Kingdom, and the energy market in the UK is pretty complex and also very automated. And I will get to that a little bit later. But what it means is that you need a software that really knows how to play well in this market. So energy as a service, what does that mean? Well, in the past, the energy market was very simple. People had these electricity meters at their homes, and they would take readings from these meters, and then the difference in the readings, they would tell the energy supplier, and then you would get an invoice based on that. But nowadays, you have something that's called a smart meter. And in the United Kingdom, for example, they already have 34 million of those smart meters rolled out to homes and companies. And these smart meters, they're basically little computers. And if you want to provide a CRM system or software solution for the energy market, you need to be able to access these meters. And then we are talking about all kinds of IT problems, like working with signing and certificates and so on. But not only do you have these smart meters, you also might have solar panels. So you're not just consuming energy, you're producing energy. You might have a battery installed at your home. You're feeding your batteries and you're using the energy for your own home, or you're feeding back energy to the grid. And then you want to get money back from the energy industry. And if you have a CRM system like ours, you need to be able to deal with that too. People might have smart devices in their homes, and you want to be able to display data, consumption data, and energy costs on those displays. And you might have, sorry for that. You might have an electric vehicle, which you might also use as a battery. So the whole scenario when it comes to energy has become much, much more complex. And then driving all of this is something that's called the DCC network in the United Kingdom. It connects energy suppliers with homes. And it is the network that allows us to access smart meters. And you would think that smart meters are attached directly to the internet, but they are not. They're actually connected to the mobile network. So you are jumping between the internet and the mobile network back and forth, and it's quite a complex process. We have implemented various applications to deal with this market, and 3 of them were done in JavaFX. So we already looked at JFX Central. So we are listing it here too, since Senapt is sponsoring the work on this. Then we have the Senapt customer relationship management software, which is an application that I worked on for the last 6-7 years. And if you follow me, if you used to follow me on Twitter, then you constantly were spammed with these green screenshots, and I refer to it to the green monster because we use a lot of green. Gives it a positive spin. And then we have a third application that we use for marketing purposes that allows us to monitor our various campaigns. Like if we do advertising on Facebook, for example, or if we just do simple campaigns like door to door, we want to know how much money we spend for each customer we acquired. And that's the software we use for that. So our desktop application for the CRM, that looks like this. And if you followed me, you will notice that it looks a little bit different now because I recently migrated to CalendarFX. That is an open source project that you can also find on GitHub. And it is not just a different theme, a different styling, but it is a design system which is based on the GitHub primer system. I believe that is the name, which gives you something like semantic colors. So instead of saying this is green, you say this is our accent color. Or instead of saying this is white, you say this is our default background color, or this is our default background color for a dialogue, and so on. So the colors have meaning. And when you do that, and I can show that a little bit later, then it becomes super easy to switch between different themes and, for example, provide a dark theme for your application. So that's our application. Here you see a customer profile that has been opened. The big green tile in the middle represents the contract that we have with that customer, the address, where he lives, and so on. You can then double click on that contract. It opens up a tray and you find out more information about our contract with that customer. Another view we have tells us everything about the electricity meter this customer has. And in this case, we can see it as an electricity meter of type SMETS2, which means this is indeed a smart meter. And if it is a smart meter, then we can use this tab, which shows the consumption data of that meter. And that consumption data was retrieved automatically via the DCC network that I talked about earlier. This is now a live demo of our application. This is the login screen, and I already filled in the password. Let me log in. So it is still pretty green, but now that we use CalendarFX, we can switch themes at any time. And for example, here we can now go to a dark version of our company theme. So let's call it Senapt Dark. And if I now go into customer management and I select one of our customers, then you can see everything is much, much darker, okay, and much more pleasant on the eye. And while I was doing this, while I was working on this, I realized actually how much nicer this is at having a dark theme. I'm so used to using IntelliJ with a dark theme. But when I look at our own software, I noticed that these white backgrounds, they were actually disturbing or put more stress on my eyes. And now that I have this dark theme, I really prefer this too, also for our own software. If you want to get really, really fancy, we can now say, for example, Dracula. Okay, that has a very, very strange color theme. I don't know who likes this, but even that will work in our application now. And then there's another one, Cupertino, with really, really strong colors. But I'm a big fan of this Nord theme. I really like it in this version. This looks pretty. We already looked at the customer management aspects of our software, but there are all kinds of other modules in our system too. And another one I would like to show is the market data portal, where we can go and we can see, for example, what are the current energy prices on the European energy market, or we can take a quick peek at the current energy generation mix in the United Kingdom. So I can tell you that at this very moment, they're producing 9.7% of their energy with wind, 18% with solar, and so on. If we go to Scotland, that's a windy place. You can see that they are producing 79% of their energy with wind and quite a bit with nuclear. Okay. or let's go to Wales. They're really into gas. So I don't know the details of the UK energy market. I don't know why it is so much gas in Wales, but the different regions have each region has their own energy mix. If we go down here, we can see the carbon intensity levels for the entirety of the United Kingdom. And we not only do we see the actual values, but also the forecast. And we can see how well the models work in forecasting how much carbon will be emitted during those time periods. Sometimes it works better, sometimes worse, but they're pretty close.
I'm really impressed with the UI. So these graphs, is this a basic JavaFX graph or is it something extended?
Yes, these are the default, the built-in JavaFX charts, the inner part, but the Chrome around it, that is a custom element that we created. So we have something that's called decorated chart view, and it always gives you like previous and next and a date picker and an additional legend at the bottom. Yeah. But the center part, that is the default chart that you can find in JavaFX. So one more module maybe, you also need to be able to create the products that you want to sell to your customers. And for that, we have a product management module. And in here, you can create electricity tariffs that you can then sell to your customers. So you can click here. These are all the electricity tariffs that we have in our system. One thing I should point out is you can see that we have paging controls. So this is a paging list view. And you can find this control also in GemsFX. So this gives you controls like page size, and the controls to go to the next and the previous page and so on. Because I noticed that the normal list view that you have in JavaFX doesn't do a good job necessarily when you work with client-server communication, where you usually use paged queries to retrieve the data. If you look back here, you can see that there are 13,000 tariffs, and we don't want to load all of them at once into the front end. So we load, in this case, 15 at a time, and then the user can go and move forward, or also perform some filtering on these tariffs. So we can now double click on one of those tariffs and it opens up the tariff in this UI, and you can see all the details for the tariffs. And another thing I just want to quickly mention is that for our product, the first thing that I did was I built a shell that gives you basic navigation functionality. This is not something you can find in JavaFX directly. And the work that I put in here actually resulted in another open source project called WorkbenchFX, which is a project that was done by 2 students at a local university. But I basically initiated this project. I gave them the ideas, and they tried to come up with an open source version of the work that I did for Senapt. So, for example, that you get these animated menus like this, that you have a overlay dialog framework built in, that you have trays that can open from the left, the right, the bottom, and so on. So you can find all these features in a project called WorkbenchFX.
So you're creating this amazing application for your customer where you work for, but you also share that same work as libraries again on JFX Central.
Yes, because this is not how we make our money with components, with UI components, right? We make money by participating in the UK energy market and selling electricity nowadays. So nobody in our company cares about a fancy control that I did for JavaFX. So why not just share it with the world, so other developers don't have to do the work over and over again. Yeah. So every time I have a control in our system where I think this would make sense to publish to GemsFX, I will try to add it there. And it's quite a task. So if I have a fancy control for our application, that does not mean it is ready to open source it directly, right? Because you really have to polish the API. You have to document everything. You have to make it super clean. And I always try to follow the standards that you can see in the core JavaFX controls. I try to have my API as close to their API as possible, so that JavaFX developers will feel familiar with the API.
About all those libraries that you created and are still working on, where can we find them?
All these libraries are on GitHub. I used to have my own company called DLSC Software and Consulting. That's what I'm using for those projects. So if you look for DLSC Software and Consulting on GitHub, you will find my repositories. And you can see that there are quite a few of them. And one of the most popular ones, for example, is CalendarFX. So when I did CalendarFX, I was really impressed by the calendar that Apple created for Mac OS. And basically, I said, if you cannot innovate, you imitate. So I copied the UI of the calendar that shipped with Mac OS at that point in time. It looks different now, but back then it looked like this. And I also tried to really give it the same functionality. So this is not read only. You can actually create your own entries. So for example, let's do this one here. And you can open this entry and I can go in here and you can say in action. And there's your calendar entry. And now we can go to the week view and I can double click on this and I can say this is a recurring event. I can say this happens every day, or I can say this occurs only on certain days, for example, weekly on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So it gives you all that typical calendar interaction capabilities that people know from professional calendar software.
This goes way further than just a bunch of components you created in a library. This is actually almost an entire application inside a library.
This is an entire application, or at least the front end of it. It does not have a persistence layer. So this is 100% view only. You have to plug in your persistence, but that should not be very complicated. And many applications, they already have some kind of calendar data, and they're just looking for a way to expose this to the user, and then they can grab this and display it and be done with it in a day. Yeah. It also has a nice month view and a view for the year, and you can even switch to a view like this one. And I don't know if you can see this, but even in this view, you can see that there are entries now on certain days. You see this little orange bar there. And it supports different time zones and search. So you can go here, it opens up, finds all the JFX in action events.
So you're one of those programmers who handled the time zone problem.
Of course. Well, I had to deal with this my whole coding career because when I finished my studies in Germany, I had to do a Gantt chart framework for my master thesis, and it already had to deal with time zone issues. And after that, I did a Gantt chart framework in Swing and then another one in JavaFX. So I always had to deal with time zones. Yeah.
Okay. So and you are a real programmer.
I'm a real programmer. Yeah. And I just want to point out there's also a complete printing framework also already built into the CalendarFX framework. So you also don't have to do this.
The rendering speed is amazing. All the functionality is amazing. Yeah. And the most amazing part is open source.
Yes. You were talking about performance. I know that JavaFX, especially in the beginning, had this reputation of being slow, but this framework has been out now for over a decade. It has just become faster and faster over time. It is really fast, stable, and mature. Okay, I can only recommend it to anyone who needs a UI framework for a front end.
Yeah, an important message is, so even the library already exists so long, but Java itself, the runtime, keeps evolving. Yes. So when you run this on a newer version of the runtime, you have all these performance benefits.
Yes, and JavaFX, they keep evolving it, okay? And they keep closing the gaps that existed for some time, for example, transitions in CSS. So that's there now. They are now adding media queries, all kinds of things. Really, the last final gaps are being closed. And it really turned into a fantastic product. And I think you recently had James in one of your interviews, James Gosling, and he also said that it's one of his favorite things in the world.
Of all times, yes.
Of all time. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.